Another quick disclaimer here, this is a well-studied Pokemon, but I'm still a relatively new player, so you should take what I say here with a grain of salt. The shift from Gen 2 to Gen 3 brought with it a lot of changes that would go on to define the competitive metagame for decades to come. Things like abilities, actually useful stab moves, an increased selection of items. But one mechanic that was introduced in Gen 2 and revamped in Gen 3 stands out as one of the most defining aspects of Gen 3 OU. I'm of course talking about spikes. Spikes are incredibly powerful because they're one of the very few things that can directly punish switching. Even just having one spike on the enemy field can create some very nasty situations. That being said, there are a number of weaknesses. Flying type Pokemon and Pokemon with the Levitate ability are immune to spike chip damage. The move itself is only distributed to a handful of specific Pokemon, which may give you some specific team building restrictions. And the move Rapid Spin, once used, will clear all spikes on your side of the field. There are even some teams that are mostly comprised of Pokemon that are immune to spikes. Of course, not all teams can or want to use spikes in their game plan, but if yours does, you'll need to pick a spiker for the job. Depending on which spiker you choose, you can support many different flavors of teams. One such Pokemon is the topic of today's video, Cloyster. Cloyster is a dual water-ice type Pokemon with sky-high physical defense, low special defense, and workable offensive power and speed. It has the useful ability Shell Armor, which protects it from critical hits and makes it more reliable at surviving incoming attacks. A water-ice typing is not very good defensively, but offensively it can come in handy, as Cloyster has access to Stab Surf and potentially Stab Ice Beam. Officially, Cloyster is ranked in OU, though its usage falls a bit short of the 4.52% threshold used in later generations. In Gen 3, tiering works a bit differently, so for now this is where things stand. Now, let's move on to Cloyster's move pool. It's not very big, but it still has plenty of awesome tools at its disposal. Of course, the elephant in the room here is going to be Spikes, which we've already discussed, and Surf for coverage, which is also not new. If Spikes wasn't enough for you, Cloyster has access to Rapid Spin and Explosion as well. While Cloyster is on the field, the combination of Spikes and Rapid Spin make it hard for the opponent to keep up a Spikes advantage. With Explosion, Cloyster gains the ability to trade with important enemy Pokemon, like their Rapid Spinner or a key defensive wall. Between Spikes, Surf, Explosion, and Rapid Spin, Cloyster really has all it needs. This is in fact the most common Cloyster set. Though of course there's still a little room for flexibility. Some teams don't necessarily need a Rapid Spinner, and so will swap Rapid Spin for a coverage move, like Hidden Power Grass for Swampert, or Ice Beam. I think Hidden Power Grass is probably the more common coverage option, just because it's pretty hard to get Cloyster in against the sort of Pokemon that Ice Beam would cover. Ice coverage can be handled more efficiently by Cloyster's teammates. Of course, you can run other coverage if you want, like Hidden Power Fire or Ground. Much less consistent, but the surprise value is there at least. Now let's move on to strengths and weaknesses. Cloyster is a Pokemon geared to providing short-term value. It's often more than willing to sacrifice itself after one or two layers of spikes and let powerful fast teammates take up the momentum. Offensive Surf allows Cloyster to find certain entry points against common Pokemon and force them out. It also helps soften up some bulky opponents along with Explosion. Compared to the other two most prevalent spikers in OU, Forretress and Skarmory, Cloyster has a distinct advantage in that it's able to avoid a Magneton. Magneton's Magnet Pull ability allows it to trap and eliminate Skarmory and a slightly weakened Forretress, eliminating a key defensive utility Pokemon and your ability to lay more spikes. Cloyster does not have such weaknesses. It ignores Magnet Pull and can switch in and out freely. It has this short-term power at the cost of long-term durability. Cloyster doesn't have the bulk to stay around for long. It can't take even resisted special hits well. It also has an arch nemesis of sorts in the form of Starmie. Offensive Starmie can come in, kill you with Thunderbolt, and rapid spin any spikes you blade, erasing the short-term momentum that Cloyster is supposed to provide. Not to mention that Starmie can often rip through common Cloyster teammates if you're not careful. To that end, it can often be a good idea for Cloyster to trade itself with an enemy Starmie. Even if you haven't set up any spikes, it can give the rest of your team some much needed breathing room. Now before we move on to the example replay, let's talk about team building decisions. What should Cloyster look like? What should its teammates look like? Here's what the standard Cloyster set looks like. There's not much reason to deviate in the EV spreads unless you're nitpicking. These EVs allow you to live both an offensive Starmie's Thunderbolt and a max attack Tyranitar's Focus Punch, though you will die to Sandstorm damage afterwards. With a timid nature and those speed EVs, you outrun every single unboosted Tyranitar. The leftover special attack EVs give you just enough power to two-shot a bulkless leftovers Tyranitar. Though if you're unconcerned with that, I guess you could probably put those EVs in speed if you wanted to. The moveset here is what works for most teams, and like I said earlier, you can switch out Rapid Spin if you don't think you need it for something like Hidden Powered Grass. As part of a team, Cloyster fits in an archetype referred to by the community as Spike Stack, which is very often a balanced or specially oriented offensive team. These often feature an offensive variation of Gengar, which is fast and powerful with wide coverage, and provides a temporary source of rapid spin protection. Jolteon is another great choice. Its high speed lets it outrun just about everything. Its powerful special coverage forces the opponent to switch often, racking up Spike's chip damage. The ability Volt Absorb provides an excellent source of electric protection, and combined with its special bulk, makes it a very good switch-in against enemy special Pokemon that threaten to kill your Cloyster. Zapdos, with its myriad ways to threaten and cripple the enemy team, as well as maintain momentum, also fits right at home. Mixed or Dragon Dance Tyranitar set up Sandstorm, which makes it easier to rack up Spike's chip damage and provide a bulky physical attacker. Along those lines, Metagross is also commonly seen. Some other Pokemon that work well here are an offensive Swampert, which is an alternative wall to electric types that also doubles as a bulky mixed attacker, and Moltres or Starmie, which both work well against opposing offensive teams. There's also the rare Jinx. Jinx has access to a sleep move in Lovely Kiss, and sleep on this sort of aggressive fast-paced team can be very devastating. By that same logic, if you want access to sleep, you can put Hypnosis on your Gengar instead. Now, before researching for this video, I made and played a few rounds with a Cloyster Special Offense team. Because I built that team before I learned all this information, of course there are going to be some inconsistent and unoptimal team building decisions, but I'll look at the team and discuss those, look at some alternatives, and then you'll get to see an example replay where you get to see Cloyster and the rest of the team in action. Okay, so here we are taking a look at the Cloyster Hyper offense team that I built before the making of this video. Let me see. No, not Big Hot Man 2. We're going, okay. Let me pull up the view. Okay, here we are. So, the overall game plan of a team like this, sort of a specially offensive team, although the Blissey is here. It shouldn't be. That was kind of a gut instinct on my part to put a special wall. The game plan is you send in Cloyster, you get a couple of spikes up, and you take down the enemy Rapid Spinner as quick as you can, even if you have to like explode to get it out of the way. Something like Claydol can be pretty annoying. And something like Starmie, of course, gives you a lot of trouble, which is why my gut instinct was to put a Blissey here, but there's better options to put there. Anyways, I digress. Once you've got a couple of spikes up, or just one or two, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to get all three up, then you can start switching between powerful special attackers, your offensive Gengar to block rapid spin attempts, and Zapdos, and powerful physical attackers, Choice Band Metagross, and Dragon Dance Tyranitar, the sort of bulky physical attackers. And you can alternate between the two to kind of continually switch the enemy out. And they'll keep taking Spike's chip every single time they do. And for the ones that don't take Spike's chip, you can You can sort of chip and wear them down with your powerful attacks. And so it's sort of like I call it the dancing on hot coals. It's like you force them to dance on hot coals to avoid your like array of powerful threats. And then once they're softened up enough, you can go to town with your Zapdos, or you can start boosting up with Dragonet's Tyranitar and also go to town that way. So let's go through the individual members here. Cloyster is here as a way to set spikes and blow up to trade with an enemy Pokemon, something like a Rapid Spinner or a Special Wall, which Gengar and Zapdos would really appreciate. Offensive Gengar is here, provide a source of rapid spin protection and with wide coverage. I'm not necessarily certain that you need to run Fire Punch on something like this, but I mean, it ended up doing pretty well in the example replay. Zapdos is just a pretty good glue on basically really just almost any team, but these teams in particular, it's really nice. It does a good job of crippling specific Pokemon, like enemy Zapdos, which the team can struggle a little bit with. Of course, Baton Pass is here just to ease in pivoting out to your physical threats. You could swap this for something like Roar to add Spike's chip damage. Metagross is here as a way for some like physical breaking power. It's really the only like defense this team has against something like Celebi. There are better ways to deal with Celebi, and I can change my moveset around than the team I built, but this is what I have, and it of course provides some physical breaking power. Blissey is the odd one out here. Hold on. This team is very fast and very fast-paced, very offensive, and putting a defensive mon like Blissey here is kind of a mismatch. I put this here because before I was thinking of stuff like Jolteon, I wanted to put, it's like my gut instinct to put a special wall that soaks up like electric-type attacks. Something like Starmie Thunderbolt would be Blissey. And so I just put it on there. I did give it Sing as a way to make it more offensively interesting, but I mean, you'd be better off putting a more aggressive special wall, something like Jolteon. And could you run Regice here? I don't know. Regice seems a bit weird on this sort of team. It could work, maybe. I don't know. I'm not qualified enough to do that. Dragonet's Tyranitar is here as your late game cleaner. Once everything is softened up, you start Dragon Dancing, and you just clean up everything that's weak. It has the bulk and coverage to wear down things like enemy Skarmory or other like passive Pokemon that can take advantage of. Lumberry's here. This is a bulkier Dragonet's Tyranitar set with less attack. I mean, you could run a fast Dragonance, 252, and a Jolly Nature. I mean, you could run something like a mixed set, but this one has Focus Punch. I would probably switch this out to Hidden Power Bug if I were remaking this team. And like I said earlier, I would switch out this Blissey for a Jolteon, and probably get rid of this Fire Punch for Thunderbolt on Gengar. I don't know about that. Maybe. But that's the team that I kind of constructed. It's not as good as like the standard Spikes offense teams you'll see out there, but it got the job done, I guess. And with that, let's go to the example replay. All right, so here we are with the Cloyster replay. And let's get right into it. All right, lead Tyranitar versus Cloyster. This is a good matchup unless it's mixed. Magneton comes in, and already you can start to see the strengths of Cloyster, because now, rather than losing my Spike or it taking heavy damage, I can switch out with relative ease. Blissey comes in. This is a Leftovers Magneton, which is a little unusual, but not unheard of. Chipping this Magneton down. Blissy's getting dangerously low, so I have to exit. In comes the offensive Gengar. Takes a big Thunderbolt, but it doesn't matter too much. This Gengar is not designed to live very long anyways. We'll see what comes in and what it can threaten with coverage. Threatening Fire Punch to kill Magneton. And now Blissey comes in. And Magneton and then Blissey. Magneton usually means that there is going to be a lot of physical attackers in the back that are usually not very good in... I mean, Snorlax wouldn't be on this team. There's a Tyranitar, for God's sake. But it wouldn't be able to take Thunderbolts from my Zapdos very well. So it's at this point that I decide to blow up and get this Blissey really low so it can't do its job effectively. Metagross comes in, forces it out, revealing enemy Skarmory. Skarmory and Magneton, very unusual combination. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Spikes are up, but that can be remedied later. Trying to Thunder Wave something coming in, like the Tyranitar or something. BP out the Tyranitar, threatening Earthquake. I used that opportunity to get a Dragon Dance and chip this Skarmory down with a +1 Focus Punch. And I'm scared at this point of Drill Peck on Skarmory. Turns out I was right, because I would have died if I didn't click Soft Boiled. But, you know, Blissey heals back up. Cloyster comes back in, because Skarmory's in, and I can establish some spikes. Gengar comes in. Hold on, let me see. How do I... Alright, there we go. The spike viewer was coming in. Gengar has come in. Now, my Blissey took 11% damage from that Gengar Thunderbolt. That's actually important because that means that this is a defensive Gengar and not an offensive one. So if I were to send my Zapdos in later, there's likely nothing that Gengar could do to actively threaten me besides a weak Ice Punch. So that's important information to know later. Tried to click Sing on something like Tyranitar or something coming in. Probably just should have healed up. I mean, it's fine. Trying to chip this Magneton down. It's just being annoying at this point, but it's not doing much against this team. Blissey takes a Toxic like a champ. Out we go to Tyranitar. And I'm worried about Will-O-Wisp here. So back in comes Zapdos. Gengar gets significantly hurt by the Zapdos Thunderbolt. And I know it can't actively threaten me back because it's a defensive Gengar. And so I can click Thunderbolt with relative ease. In comes Metagross. Opponent intelligently clicks Earthquake. Just chipping down this Metagross into range. I can't remember if that calc was Agility Metagross or Choice Band Metagross. I think it was Choice Band. I don't remember. Tyranitar gets paralyzed. That's very unfortunate for the opponent because it means that this Tyranitar is not going to be doing much of anything threatening besides being a bulky sponge for attacks. Threatening Earthquake. And in comes Cloyster once again. Now there's 3 spikes, and I'm like, okay, the enemy is going to block my Rapid Spin here. In comes Gengar, and a Surf takes it down with a lucky crit. I think that mattered. And now that Gengar is gone, I can rapid spin all 3 spikes away. Now Blissey and Tyranitar are safe from immense chip damage. And there's really nothing more Cloyster can do at this point, so I just blow it up. And I think it could have killed that Metagross there. I mean, I don't know. And besides this Tyranitar, there is almost nothing that is threatening to my Zapdos at this point. I probably could have clicked Thunderbolt and just cleaned up the rest of the team with Dragon Dance Tyranitar, but opted to stick on the safe side. Sing Blissey puts this Skarmory to bed. It's not going to matter too much because it wakes up and just roars me away. Toxic comes in. I was afraid of getting a Toxic on Zapdos for whatever reason. I didn't want it to... I mean, it probably wouldn't have mattered too much. Opponent sacks Blissey to get an entry point for Tyranitar. I just go back to Blissey at this point because it can stomach a hit well enough. And I think it's at this point the opponent just gives up and lets me Seismic Toss this thing to death and forfeit shortly after. So if we go back to the beginning, some pivotal moments. So, Cloyster versus Magneton interaction. You can see the unique strengths of Cloyster here. It can more reliably get at least 1 spike up because it is not trapped by Magneton. Offensive Gengar comes in, draws out the enemy special wall, a Blissey, and then promptly blows up on it, getting rid of a potential sponge for Zapdos later on. Then the combination of Zapdos, Tyranitar, and Blissey do a fairly good job of softening up the enemy team in preparation for the endgame. Cloyster comes in and gets a spike. Even just 1 or 2 spikes go a long way in a team like this. Cloyster comes back in later in the game. This is a lot longer than Cloyster usually lives, to be fair. But kills the enemy Gengar, spins away all 3 spikes, and then promptly blows up to make way for the rest of the team to sweep the now dangerously low and very weak enemy team. And that's where it ends. So hopefully that was illustrative of how Cloyster can be useful on a fast-paced aggressive team like that. Of course, this team was not 100% optimal, but it did its job very effectively, I think. It actually used all 4 moves, unlike the last video where the featured Pokemon just clicked a move twice and then did absolutely nothing for the rest of the game. And personally speaking, with a couple of tweaks to this team, I think it can be very fun. I like this team a lot. I used it a couple of times on the ladder, and it's very fun. You know, in a metagame where there's a lot of mid-pace teams running around, Toxic, Spike, Sandstorm, I like stall teams too, but every now and then, I want to put the opponent on the ropes, you know, and I want to have some fun making them dance around and trying to maneuver out of the way of what I have to offer. So it's a unique and fun, different playstyle, strong playstyle that you can try out if you wish. And of course, once again, I'm not, like, good. So this is not 100% representative of something like real tournament play, but hopefully it's good enough. I'll post a couple of the resources I used for researching this sort of video, and the teams that Cloyster fits on, and Cloyster itself, so hopefully you find those useful whenever you're looking at this Pokemon and the teams it fits on.